Do you believe that that date exists, or is this some attempt at negotiation?
Well, I can't say what's in his mind, but I can say that the negotiations, as you just reported it, are intense for the relief of hostages, hopefully at least 40 hostages in exchange for some Palestinian prisoners held in Israel. I think that's the priority. I think that's what Israeli families need to hear. I think that that is what the world needs to see as at least some relief from this very tense and tragic humanitarian situation. That's priority number one. Priority number two is humanitarian aid now. Priority number three is some kind of a long-range vision for how this goes. Israel is right to want to destroy Hamas leadership, yes, but the means they have chosen has caused untold suffering. And now the issue is, what can the neighbors plus the U.S., plus many in Israel who want this result, like Benny Gantz, who's in the War Cabinet, engineer to bring about a long-term solution? I still think it's a two-state solution for two peoples, but that would be my take on that. Let me just say, Joe and Kailey, that today was a rare moment of nonpartisanship with this eclipse. The whole country seemed to come together, and it at least inspires me to think maybe, just maybe, there is some light at the end of this dark tunnel in U.S. politics.
Yeah, still, we can find something of a moment of unity, even if it was just for a moment today, Jane. But your point is very well taken at a time when there is a lot that divides us, including, frankly, support for Israel, especially now as you have many Democrats who are unhappy with the civilian death toll in Gaza, do not think that the U.S. should continue to support Israel militarily without conditions. This is going to be the subject of much debate when the House returns, as you could potentially have aid for Israel tied together with aid for Ukraine and potentially be losing people in both parties on both sides of that issue. How would you advise the House Speaker on his path forward on aid for both of these allies?
I think he needs to choose between his personal survival as Speaker and doing the right thing. If he actually does the right thing, he may survive as Speaker with some Democratic votes. Let's understand that a motion to vacate can be brought by one person, and that the tiny margin in the House, if all the Republicans vote that way, takes him out. But Democrats could help him. He has to do the right thing. What's the right thing on Israel? The right thing on Israel is to vote this aid and to push for what I just said, a three-part solution: the hostages, humanitarian aid, and a long-term settlement. What's the right thing on Ukraine? I was in Kyiv for 2 days last week. I chair the Commission on National Defense Strategy. Several of the commissioners were with me. We were looking at the aerospace base that Ukraine is building without aid from anyone. But let's understand, they can build low-cost drones for $350 a copy. They can build longer-range drones and tanks. But those things will not work without our aid. They need anti-jamming equipment for us, for the targeting for the drones, and they need air cover, long-range fires, plus the Patriot system or some other missile defense system around the country. What is happening right now as we're talking about all this is Ukrainians are dying on the battlefield. And Zelensky told David Ignatius of the Post a few days ago that he has to shorten the line. That means shorten the area where he can defend his country because he doesn't have enough ammo. It's embarrassing. It's pathetic. And the U.S. has pledged this aid. And so far as I know, That's Mike right. Johnson supports the aid. And Mike Pompeo is just urging from outside that we provide this aid. So to conclude, I mean, I think Mike Johnson should choose between doing the right thing and surviving. And he should pick doing the right thing. And then he may have a chance to survive. Otherwise, he'll be gone in a few months over some other issue.
It is curious because we also keep hearing, Jane, that this bill would pass if it ever got to the floor. It's just a matter of actually getting to a vote. The international community is watching. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg talked with Bloomberg last Friday about the need for the U.S. to send a message to Russia here. Listen to how he phrased his answer, Jane, and we'll have you respond.
It is also in the security interest of the United States to prevent President Putin from winning. And that will send a message to him, but also to President Xi in China, that when they use military force, when they invade another country, when they violate international law, they achieve their aims. that will reduce the threshold for any future use of force. What happens in Ukraine today can happen in Taiwan tomorrow. So therefore, it is in the national security interest of the United States to provide military support to Ukraine.
Well, let me add two things to that.
Spending a chunk of this hour, Jane, talking about Janet Yellen going to China. What does China make of this lack of consensus, this sort of endless debate here in Washington?
Well, China, makes of it that we are in dysfunction, and those are opportunities for China. But let's focus on Ukraine for 1 minute, just to add to what Stoltenberg said. The Ukrainians either beat Russia in Ukraine or we fight Russia in Europe. It's not complicated. And when we fight in Europe as part of NATO, we have boots on the ground. We don't have boots on the ground in Ukraine. That's one point. The other point that he didn't make is that 70% of our appropriations for Ukraine stays in the United States. What we're doing is backstopping aerospace firms here who build things in districts. Oh, by the way, there's a tank factory in Louisiana. Is Mike Johnson listening? Build jobs in Louisiana and elsewhere, and we're backstopping them with most of this money, and we're saving not just Ukrainian lives, but we're saving American freedom.
Jane, I want to ask you about reporting that we got from the UN nuclear watchdog today that warned that the Zaporizhzhia power plant in Ukraine came, quote, quite close to a nuclear accident yesterday after it was attacked by drones. There was a time where we were talking a lot about the situation at this plant. It seems that it has faded to the background. But how worried should we be about something that could be a catastrophic accident happening, given the operations we're seeing Russia conduct?
Well, I wouldn't call it an accident if Russia is deliberately targeting the plant. I asked about this when we were in Ukraine. The problem is that the reactor is on to protect the core from melting down. It's not functioning beyond that. But if the core melts down of this nuclear reactor, that's nuclear material. It gets in the water table. It will poison the people in some area around it. But also, just if there is some radiation that comes after that or along with that, that radiation can move toward Russia, depending on the wind, or it can move toward NATO. And there is a fair question about whether radiation that comes from a power plant that's been deliberately attacked by Russia and wafts over the airspace of NATO countries could be considered an event that would trigger Article 5. I mean, this is highly dangerous stuff. And this illegal, wrong war is leading to consequences we don't know yet. But the crucial fact right now is for Congress to do something it should have done 8 months ago, that the Senate did 2 months ago with support from 22 Republicans. Let the House move now. Ukrainians are dying now, and Americans will die later if they don't act.
Well, it could be weeks, we understand, Jane, before a Ukraine funding bill hits the floor of the House. We were told this window was closing at the beginning of the year. What is the real situation? It's going to take time once they approve this money. You obviously know a lot about this, having served to the capacity that you did in Congress. The wait, even if they approve this today, will continue in Kyiv.
Well, if they approve the version that the Senate passed overwhelmingly, I just mentioned that, including 22 Republican votes with strong support from Mitch McConnell, the minority leader, and Susan Collins, who is the chair of the ranking member on the House Appropriations Committee who managed the bill, if they approve that version, then they don't need a conference. Then that goes to President Biden, who would sign it quickly. He's already said that he would. And that version, whether it's perfect or not, includes tough border protections, which the Republicans have said all along that they want and which Biden will implement. So, I mean, why can't they take yes for an answer? And if that is approved immediately, aid will start to flow. I don't think it's months or weeks. I don't know how many months or weeks we have before this thing goes drastically south. And so I just say, to Mike Johnson, choose between doing the right thing and saving yourself. You might get both, or you might get neither.